and being able to sit with people in different spaces. Because when you talk about safe spaces, which we've talked about a lot, I think we need to continue to unpack what a safe space is. Because I think, again, are you a convener of the space or are you invited to the space? Power hovers over space like a vulture on the garbage thing. Power can just hover without you even you think you're so doing so good. So is this space, is everybody speaking a certain language, a certain lingua? Is everybody are we getting the nuances? Are we getting the jokes? Or is it a clique of people who grew up in a certain area can make the jokes and the rest don't get it? All of these things are disempowering. All of these people exclude people. And yet we may all have our DEI ticked, tick, tick, tick. So the thing about safe spaces is it's a triggering one.
Welcome to the Rethink Social Change podcast, where we talk about what truly moves the needle for equitable and inclusive societal progress. I'm your host, Ratiba Sharif. I've designed, learned from, and evaluated social change for 20 years on 4 continents. I share my own insights here, but mostly amplify the voices of global change makers. I randomly draw cards from the Rethink Social Change deck to spark and guide unscripted conversations with them that explore what works, what doesn't, and why. Join us for real talk and lessons you can apply to create truly transformative social initiatives. She embodies the spirit of bridging worlds, fostering learning, and transforming conflicts into pathways of peace. I'm so thrilled to welcome Ruby Quantson Davis, a catalyst for change in the peace-building space, who brings 2 decades of global experience in public policy research, advocacy, and community engagement. Ruby is known for her innovative approaches to conflict prevention and peace processes in politically polarized areas and regions through the use of creative methods to reflect, document, and share knowledge. A scholar practitioner in the truest sense, Ruby is currently the Senior Learning and Impact Advisor at Peace Direct, where she ensures that learning isn't just a byproduct, but a driving force within the organization. She's also an associate member at Wesley House in Cambridge, a faculty member at the Deliberative Democracy Institute, and a former resident scholar with the Kettering Foundation in the US. I'm hoping that the cards drawn today will enable Ruby to share her insights into the power of community-driven peacebuilding, inclusive democracy, the journey of learning, and her vision for a world where authentic understanding leads to sustainable change. Ruby, hi. Welcome
Hello.
to Rethink podcast. Thanks for joining me.
It's wonderful to be here, Ratiba. I'm so glad we're finally doing this.
Absolutely, yes. So you know that we're going to have a conversation. You also know that the conversation is guided by words on cards from the Rethink Social Change cards. So I will shuffle the deck of 54 cards and select the 4 that are going to guide our conversation. So I don't know where the conversation will take place.
Scary.
But
Okay.
I'm sure we'll make something out of it. So while I shuffle the cards, Ruby, so you're joining me from Cambridge in the UK?
Yes,
Excellent.
I am in Cambridge in England, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and tell me, anything exciting you're working on right now?
Ooh.
I'm sure
official stuff, unofficial stuff. Well, first of all, Cambridge is vibrant, and as always, some intellectual conversation going on, or students inspiring you to work. But also, I'm keeping my eyes on the continent in Africa, where so much is happening, especially from my native Ghana, where we have elections. So I'm keeping my eyes on that. Of course, we're not going to sit here and pretend that we didn't hear news of US elections yesterday. Yep. So I think I'm just in that kind of mode of what does this mean? So, elections in my own home country, elections happen in the UK this year, and elections in the US, and, working at Peace Direct, all of that is important to us. Yeah. What does this mean for our kind of work and influencing? So that's kind of where I am this morning.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, it's about sense making right now, right? This year has been, elections all over. We're we're getting to the tail end of 2024. So the last remaining elections are coming through now, are going to start. And it's about, seeing how this is shifting some of the realities, the perspectives, the modus operandi. And in your field, I did a short intro earlier. In your field, it's more needed than ever, right?
Yes.
In the field
Yes,
of
absolutely. Absolutely.
okay. So I've got our cards. So are you ready?
It's
Let's
scary,
go.
but I'm just gonna go for it.
Okay, so here are the colors. So today we're looking at blues and greens, and the first card is a change card. It's institutional level. So change at institutional level. And this is about practices, relationships, organizations. Okay. And then we have a resource card, which is technology. And here we have use of digital processes, tools, methods, things like that. We have a qualified card, which is levers.
Okay.
So what are some of the processes, the people, the systems that you harness in your work? And how does that come about? And then we have a specify card, which is achievable. And this one is that can be attained within the timeline, within the framework. So there we are. These are our 4 cards for today. Do they resonate, and what ideas do they bring about?
Oh, so much. So much that I'm tempted to say, do we have the time? But at the same time, just daunting, because I think these 4 cards touch on the very core of the work we engaged in, personally with my broader network, but also specifically with Peace Direct that I currently work for. Well, I think I want to start with that change card.
Institution.
I think change, because I think, as I said, we're recording this at this time where change has occurred. And, when we talk about, say, the US, I mean, whether you agree with the outcome of the elections or not, change has occurred. Change has occurred in our different countries, but change is occurring in the international development sector. And it's occurring, let me take a quick trip to the achievable card. It's occurring in a time frame that is probably not what we desire. And what I mean by that is probably not at the speed of change that we want to see. And so there is a little bit of, sometimes a little bit of fatigue in the change processes. And a little bit of burnout that I think folks sometimes feel in a sector like international development, and particularly in peace building. And I think at a time where conflicts are so protracted and raging, and and people don't feel like leaders at different levels are taking the actions they need to take, I think it change just reverberates and kind of makes us say, what can we achieve? What is achievable? Bear in mind that you find people who say to you, the change we're trying to effect is not achievable. That forget about it. That Western governments are not going to change the way they do things. That international funders are not going to change the way they do things. So here is where I want to start. I think when we think about change, I think it's important that we don't leave that conversation at a certain high level where people cannot relate to. I think it's important that we begin, it sounds like a cliche when people say change begins with you. But I think even the thought process around change needs to occur within you. Because when the burnout I talked about comes around, and it will, you're going to have to, yes, no doubt. And you're going to have to tap into that earlier energy that propelled you forward. You're going to have periodic times to kind of say, why am I doing this? So why the change for me is a conversation to have. Why the change? Where should the change occur? What are the ways in which the change can occur? Now, I've just come to appreciate incremental changes. And so again, when we're talking about achievable, I think, we come from schools of thought where, we set certain targets and we want to get it all along. And anybody involved in a change process knows that sometimes there are variables that do not depend on you.
Yeah.
And indeed, what you may have thought was a constant is not. In international development, there are very few constants, if you will. So I think incremental change is something I really want to put on the table at a time where there is so much hope, a sense of helplessness and hopelessness in the world, and to kind of help us to celebrate little bits of change, and to observe the various levels at which this change occurred. And so it could be, as I said, at the individual level. Has there been a mindset change? Have we ourselves, as you as an individual, me as an individual, have I shifted a little bit? Or am I willing to shift a little bit in the way I see things? And then I go into my organization. I'm leading a change process. We are, overall, strategically, our vision is to effect shifts in the peace building sector, particularly local peace building. We're looking that resources will be shifted to where it's needed the most. And our argument, our assumption is that there are fantastic local peace work occurring around the world, but they don't get the support they need. There we go. What card am I looking at?
This is the card of levers.
The levers.
Potential. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so there are people and there are networks that we can leverage, and in order to shift that system. And so shifting from that individual level at the organizational level, institutional level, there are ways and entry points in which we can effect that change. And I think for the work we're doing at the moment, we are naming and calling what is uncomfortable, and which is that this system that we want to shift and change is swimming in structural discrimination, racism, and fundamental imbalance, and several levels of marginalization. And we've got to name what it is in the system we're trying to change, so that we can get to the right, lever points, if you will. And I think that is scary, because if you wake up in the morning and you realize that the people you have to influence, or the corridors of advocacy you need to get into, perhaps the high and mighty, perhaps governments, or and different types of government, depending on who is in power, your chances of achievement and success could be limited. I think it's scary, but I do think that we need to be clear what about the system we're trying to change, because we know we're not going to be able to change all of it within a certain time frame. But naming it allows us to leverage certain groups of people and the work that they do. And for us, it's primarily local peace builders, and then calling attention of the rest of the world to the work that they are doing.
Great. So this is our first takeaway, right? Clarity and naming the change, being intentional about naming it. Thank you for that. I want to backtrack a little bit. You talked about the fact that, the notion of speed and how change happens, right? And it's interesting because change happens so slowly, hence the fatigue maybe, and the hopelessness that can ensue. But also everything moves so fast around us.
Yes.
So you have those two speeds, right? Different speeds of change. How do you reconciliate the two? And what could be some of the avenues to some of the waves that you can surf on to help you gain that speed and traction that you need? So that's one question that kind of came to mind. And I really like your focus on bringing about incremental change. So looking at, because if you clarify and you name change, then you'll know what are the milestones you need to achieve along that journey of change, right? So that's an interesting one that I'd like to talk about. And the last one is that you're naming it for what it is, some of the issues and what's actually hindering peaceful environments or even processes or engagement, right? And you're naming and making sure that you don't shy away from making people uncomfortable, right? I wanted to know if there was any resonance and in which constituencies are you encountering a positive or a negative resonance to that naming the uncomfortable?
Well, thank you for that. Let me start with that latter point about naming the uncomfortable. Do you know what I've learned, Rutiba? I've learned talking to different people and working in different communities that sometimes people think they are not uncomfortable with things. We're talking about decolonizing the peace building sector. We're talking about decolonizing things like monitoring, evaluation, and learning. We're talking about decolonizing gender integration and data collection analysis. And you don't often find someone who rises immediately and say, I'm against it. No. It's in the course of the change process that you begin to see where resistance is. And resistance is an important part in change process. We are advised, all change practitioners know that you have to look out for the resistance points. And resistance is not immediately negative. It may sound negative to your ears because people just are lousy at giving feedback and they'll rather talk behind you than talk in front of you. So you've got to be ready to kind of sit through it. But the naming is going to be uncomfortable, and people don't know that they are uncomfortable with part of the journey till it begins to question them and their own existence. It begins to question their privilege. It begins to question the new actions they have to take in their portfolios and organizations. It begins to question their sense of achievement, because it's not that we talk about incremental success. That's not everybody's cup of tea. And we ultimately come from a business model and a corporate world that has put out certain indicators of success. And so when those things don't look like success to in our minds, we push back on it. So I just really want to name this, that it's usually not, we're good at naming the usual suspects. I can imagine a number of Western governments who do not want to engage the question of reparation or do not want to engage the question of decolonization. And we can see where the discomfort is. Reparation is, you've got to do something about it if you engage it. When you apologize for slavery, you probably will need to do something about it. So people hesitate. But I just want to speak to ourselves in the development world, white, black, brown, all colors. I've just learned to just really examine where my discomfort is. And I've seen that whether it's in presenting a lecture, seeing how people shift in their chairs, or the comments they put on an article or a podcast or whatever, that's just, these are it's so not clear to people where they are. But to your question, I think really where people feel uncomfortable the most when you name issues like the need to support local peace builders, the discomfort is a lack of expertise in that. We're very, very quick to talk about the so-called global South not having expertise in weather technology. Technology is one of my cards. And they don't have this and they don't have that. Is the international development space talking about the expertise we don't have? So there's a certain privilege that make us come out of school and enter the international development space, whether it's for humanitarian work or peace building, that gives us a certain clout. And it's really a privilege to be in there and relate to people in different parts of the world who have been living this life. It's not work. It's like c'est la vie for them daily. You know what I'm saying? And we need to kind of name, whenever you name the fact that we in the development sector actually are not qualified sometimes to do this work, and passion to save the world, and a few skills here and there or theoretical framework is not what saves. We know that's not changed the continent. And so that, I think that realization, like, boy, this change process they are talking about, I don't know what it takes. But unfortunately, we're not great at naming that, taking a humble posture, a genuine humble. I'm not talking about fake humility, a genuine humility to name the fact that I don't have it, and that there are skills to be learned. And and when you asked earlier on, what am I working on? I think it's kind of creating that space where practitioners, and as you are doing with this space, where we unpack what we're struggling with, because none of us have arrived, and so I think we need to come down from that high horse of, this development lens and speaking at people over there, because I bet you a whole lot of them know a whole lot than we would ever know when we sit on the plane to go to their countries.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Ruby, I mean, we'll come back to the other questions. I just want to just talk a little bit more about this point, because it's an interesting point that I've been reflecting on, individually, but also with colleagues when in different organizations. So there's two points. The first one is that this decolonization, just let's take this decolonization concept that's been coming out now, and it's being quite at the forefront of it. Some organizations have rethought completely the way they work. Some donors have also shifted a little bit the way they provide funding, who they provide funding to, and in which way, etc. But and then there's the projects, right, with their lofty goals. We want to do this. That are. Do you think that those projects then, and I'm caricaturing, are just paying lip service to, when we want people to empower, lofty goals, empower people to take on the reins of their civic participation, etc. Is it just lip service because resistance is still there, and it kind of manifests itself not so much in the language, but more in the processes, the structure, the mechanisms that are put in place to either thwart completely or really, retain and not, so that you don't advance as quickly as possible. So I wanted to know, is it two constituencies completely different? People from the so-called global South are now realizing and demanding things, that are speaking more openly. And on the other side, that there's really just resistance, and it's just... forgive the word, but I can't find another one right now, a little masquerade. Or are we really, are there people on both sides or on all sides, let's say, really working towards this, recognizing this, understanding this, seeing that without this approach or this vision, sustainable change, real change cannot occur?
I think I've been around this work enough to learn and to tell myself that I do not condemn work that people are doing. The reason being that there is so much to do. There is so much to do that if sometimes talk about incremental, the way that I measure success is so incremental that I'm looking at every line. And so sometimes if all that people do is get a word into their strategic document, I'm going to celebrate. Of course, if it takes 5 years and they don't go beyond that, I have a problem with it, and I would find the avenues to talk about it. But I guess the point I'm making is that the problems of when I think of the feminist movement, I think of gender inclusion, how long it took. I mean, now we're talking about 25 years of Resolution 1325, and you just kind of look back and say, couldn't we have done more? But you know what? If we look carefully, also, we know that there's been some changes in certain places. Governments have adopted this, domesticated it, and so on and so forth. So I use that to say, whatever it is that people are able to contribute to the agenda, it's great for that moment. But that being said, I think there is lip service. I'm not going to sit here and pretend there isn't. And I guess beyond just naming lip service, I would say, let's look at the motivation behind the lip service. That's where the change needs to occur. Yeah. Don't because I think when you get bogged down with lip service, you're running and being critical, and the we're all already tired with criticism. But when you look at the motivation behind the lip service, you're probably going to find something like, is the organization feeling compelled to name a strategy that sounds woke, if you will, that sounds inclusive, that has all the DI markers there? Is it at that level? Is it coming from their funders?
Yeah.
Is it or is it, and this is where it's harder, Or is it the people in the organization themselves who do not believe in this and they're just kind of blabbing away? So looking at the motivation behind that is really, really important. And I think it's also important to say lip service can be draining when you really want to get the work done. And lip service can be re-traumatizing. If you have been a victim of a system and you meet people who act as if they are with you, and then along the way you realize that they have a different agenda, and this can happen at all levels. It can happen with funders, it can happen with governments, it can happen in the family, it can happen with your colleagues. These are all things you are led to when you are leading a change process. That you take the resources and the wherewithal that comes with it at a certain point, but be aware when people withdraw, you're gonna have to adjust quickly. You talked earlier on about how we kind of keep this going, and I wrote down, well, you've got to have those reflective platforms to reflect on your change process. It is so important because, as you say, we're kind of locked in the speed and in the speed of projects, and we are so projectized that we've got to get to the end and write and report. And not many people are able to hold both. And to hold both is a little push and pull here and sacrifices here. There are times you're going to have to make a decision to drive your strategic agenda. There are times you're going to go practically and then put a report in and step back. But whatever you do, you're going to have to create space to step back and reflect. And that's what we found wanting, right? Because as you say, the world, things are moving so fast. Time is literally of the essence, but we've got to be a little more strategic, and we need to work with options. We need to work with options. And these options are as broad as can be. People will drop off what would be option B or option 2, or literally weighing those 3 or 4 options and saying, well, we like this option, but here are the drawbacks of it. So we are aware, and we can think of how we can mitigate that as we go. I think that really is what is at the base of our change process, our systems change process, and our ability to hold the levers together and to leverage at different times. I think if we're not doing that, we could easily drop the ball, and we could join the lip service team.
Yeah, you turn around 15 years or 10 years from now when there's a new buzzword, and just forget about the actual work that's been done. Great. Before we move on, because I've got another question coming up, but just talk to me a little bit about speed. Very fast and very, the world is moving at a faster pace, yet the change that we aim for, that you aim for, is slower. How do you reconcile the two, and what are some of the ways that you can surf to expedite some change, or expedite, even if it's incremental, right? Little grains along the way that can help.
Well, you may have heard it said in various languages, but it translates something like make haste carefully, like hurry carefully. And it seems like a contradiction. The fact that you have to hurry doesn't mean that you don't have to be thoughtful. And I think the tension you present is really real. The environment we operate in is changing so drastically. Before we can catch up on policies, they change. Before we can get to the offices of policymakers, they are removed. And indeed, before civil society, members of civil society could fully build their capacity to go the full haul, they either change sectors, or they're burned out, or life happens. So at all levels, the change, the speed of things is really, really going to happen. And this is why I think being strategic grounds you. And when we have actually thought through what it is that we want to change, what the environment of the change looks like, what the options of change look like, and who we need to be part of it, I think these are really, really important things to hold. We also need to kind of recognize what we have no control over. I mean, there are certain, things that happen with the speed of light. And no matter how you plan, it's not gonna work according to you. But here is the other thing, Ratiba. It's what skills and knowledge and resilience and how have we built ourselves to do this work? And I think we underestimate that. I think we become so focused on the projects we need to implement that we're not thinking of the machinery needed to do that, the soft skills and the hard skills to do that. And so when these speed and changes happen in the environment we're found wanting, could we figure out what we need in ourselves as embodied beings? These are emotional, psychological, physical skills, technology, whatever it is. We need to spend time to take stock of those resources we need within us and outside of us, because that becomes grounding when things change around us, but that also helps us to quickly mobilize and re-strategize and take practical steps. And this requires, I think, if we think about that change at organizational level, it's most useful when you are on the same page. It's most useful when you are talking together regularly and deeply. It's most useful when you all can anticipate the change that's happening and you can all talk through, and I say all, doesn't mean that, an organization that has 200 people are going to convene everybody. But also, again, what resources do we need? What talking resources do we need? What dialoguing resources do we need? These are all things we're too busy to kind of pay attention to. And then we found wanting. And I think the worst thing that can happen to us is when we lose our people, because everything we're doing at any level, we're building people up for a world that is getting difficult, and we shouldn't lose them. They might move on to other things, but I do believe that even when people move on, they take in something with them and they can affect that environment. And so it's really important that we are investing in people to affect different parts of the world.
And just planting those seeds, right? Planting those seeds into everyone, and even if they flourish in other environments, the better. This touches on two comments. One is achievable. Coming back to your first point, is clarify and name that change. Is like, how are we going to achieve it? How do we recognize? And you rightly say, so the recognize when we do not have the resources to take that change forward. We have to partner, finding the right partners that are on the same wavelength, and on the same mindfulness kind of length as well. So those are important. The other point that you touch on here is, and it's one that you made earlier, is finding the time for reflection. The time for reflection is also an important resource. So the time and the material resources for bringing people together into meaningful, safe spaces where you can discuss what's not working. Especially in this kind of environment, what I've seen from my experience is that you bring in a project, tools, resources into community, whatever its size, right? Could be a village, it could be a larger community within like a ministry, a group, a consortium of ministries, for example, if you work at institutional level, right? You bring in that resource. The moment you come in, it shifts the way they behave, the way they act. It changes the way you react or your partners react, so it's in constant flux, and you have to keep your finger on the pulse to see where it's doing less. It's actually hindering the advancement of the project by, say, having the wrong people in the conversation. And it's that taking stock moment, that pause and reflect moment that you need to have and pepper throughout the project. Different sizes, bringing with different modalities in terms of, is it going to be a workshop? Is it going to be a kind of after action review? It depends, right? Is it going to be a strategic review moment? Do you need to sit down with your donor at that point?
You named something that is really, really important. You said, as soon as you bring in your tools and mechanisms, something changes. And I think that is so important, because we need to see change processes as introducing an intervention or a catalyst or something. And I think we need to really spend time to understand and unpack what are the potential effects of that change. I think sometimes we're just so happy about the fact that we're helping. And, even when people went and colonized other countries, they thought they were helping, so so help is something we need to look at carefully. And it's all nice to be willing to do that. We shouldn't discourage people from doing that. But I think that is a key developmental concept. Introducing an intervention, what are the repercussions of it? And so we are affecting people's knowledge systems when we introduce things. We may think technology is wonderful, AI is wonderful, data sets and so on. But we've got to think about how could distort. And for those of us who would wear that locally led and decolonial lens, we've got to remember that that has already happened in history, that those systems have been distorted in the past. And so when we want to help, we at the very least, let's not make it worse. So we've got to look at that. And the way to do that is to create those reflective spaces, but to pose those questions, those key learning questions that say, what is it that we want to do here? What might work? What might not work? Because unless you're posing the question of what might not work, you probably not feel confident and bold enough to say it didn't work. And also, we've got to name the power in the space. When we go and introduce these things to people, I often say we're so trained to let the foreigner feel welcome, at least in my culture. It's rude to not let it. We take that into development work. If you were to spend time with the women in the back or wherever they are, under the tree, in one of the living room, the parlor of one of them, then you would know exactly what they think about your intervention. Are we in those spaces? Have we built enough trust to be in those spaces? Because as someone said in a conversation one, she said, when people come into our communities, we tell them what they want to hear. So if you're hearing what they want to hear, you probably do not even know. You've got to build the trust and the relationship first. But again, speed, things are happening with speed. But I don't think that speed and the change in our environment is an excuse for not doing things right. I don't believe that. I do think that you hold that as something that can be changing and you're still building your trust. And there could be a time where your trust building process is good. But some of that trust building work is even mental. It's not about sitting with somebody. It's about you determining to respect the other person. Yeah. And so a lot of us are not even unpacking that. We, kind of so want to go and do something for the other person. Fundamentally, how do you see the other person? Do you see that person in that country as needy? And do you think it's you now coming into this field are the one who's going to save them? So, there is work to be done in that reflective space. And that reflective space, as we said at the beginning, can occur within you. And you can be honest with yourself. And you can be honest with what you have and what you don't have. Because the point is everyone has something. But let's not overassume what we have. But I think, that point about being thoughtful about what could go wrong with an intervention is really, really important. And being able to sit with people in different spaces, because when you talk about safe spaces, which we've talked about a lot, I think we need to continue to unpack what a safe space is, because I think, again, are you a convener of the space or are you invited to the space? Power hovers over space like a vulture on a garbage thing. Power can just hover without you even, you think you're doing so good. So is this space, is everybody speaking a certain language, a certain lingua? Is everybody, are we getting the nuances? Are we getting the jokes? Or is it a clique of people who grew up in a certain area can make the jokes and the rest don't get it? All of these things are disempowering. All of these people exclude people. And yet we may all have our DEI ticked, tick, tick, tick. So the thing about safe spaces is it's a triggering one, because day after day, we find ourselves in spaces where you see people meaning so well, but this conversation is so exclusive. This conversation has no clue about my worldview. This conversation has decided to leave a part of me outside. And we keep fragmenting people. People are whole beings. And I think this is the thing that Indigenous communities have been telling us. We are whole beings. Don't let the development paradigm fragment us. Could we allow people to come into the development space with all of who they are? Because this is what I've learned in doing locally led and decolonial monitoring and evaluation. When people come in with all of who they are, you don't have to worry about it. Outcomes will come to you because there is a relationship. Impact, you will see and you will hear it, but also you will feel it because you resonate with them.
Yeah.
Can we just sit with the discomfort that allow people to come with all of who they are
Mm.
and stop structuring their lives?
Mm. Yeah, it's wonderful. We haven't talked about a few of the things that I had in mind, Ruby, but this was a very rich conversation, and thank you for raising and reminding me of the importance of understanding the weight of words. So when we say safe spaces, it might mean something for me, it might not mean for others. So let's explain what it, and we're all, it's good reminders for all of us, regardless of our background. I'm a woman, I come from North Africa, I've worked in peace building, and I still assume or use them as kind of shorthand for something. So thanks for that reminder. It's an important one. And it also reminded me, as you were speaking, I listened to one of you facilitated a panel on deliberative democracy and women. And I think you started by saying, I hear you. You are heard. And that's what you're saying right here. And this is it. It's about hearing people, because actually those people under trees, I found, outside of institutionalized or organized evaluations that I've had to do. So if I go to the field really just to see what's going on, they are the ones who name the uncomfortable. They're telling you, okay, you came here and so what? You've done all this. You've been here so many times. And so what? It's true. They remember, and they just want to be heard, not just interviewed, or they just don't want to be a data point or a data set. They really want you to act on that. And it doesn't have to be in monitoring. It can also be in evaluations. It can also be when you do your monitoring, when you have like real intentional anchored monitoring to the reality on the ground. You're not just ticking the box of outputs. You're actually seeing where you're not working, where you're creating, let's say, more harm, where you're having the wrong part. You have participants, you've got your trainings, they're full of participants. Women are here. If you're looking at just number of women, women are they the right women? What are you creating? What other dynamics are you shifting underneath by bringing these people together? Do they have the leverage to bring about change when they come out of that training?
Well, that's right. Can we, I look for it. I'm looking for a couple of people who hang with me and say, we're doing evaluation. We have no questions. We have no templates. We have can we just sit with the community? And maybe there isn't funding that goes into that, but I do believe there are serious organizations that are interested in serious change processes who will put money behind that. Because as you said, these things don't have to happen within the frame of monitoring and evaluation. I'll tell you a story quickly. We were in the Great Lakes region sitting with our partners a couple of months ago, and we have an agenda, and we have a habit of co-creating the agenda with our partners, which is also a scary thing for people because, we're used to, the sector is used to structure. But we've done that, and thankfully our partners know us and they have plugged in what they want to do. But even as we sat there, by the third day, I didn't feel that the women's story were coming out the way that it would, because I know that context. I know what it means to sit in an African setting and tell your story. And the structure, as we've been as open as we can be, but it was still not happening. I'm like, may I seek permission to hold a women's corner? And we just went and sat on the lawn. And a couple of, I work with lovely people who wanted to join the meeting. I said no. Because this meeting is going, if you're prepared to just sit, you don't have please don't bring a notebook. We're not taking notes. We're not capturing stories. If you're prepared to sit, and the sun is beginning to bear on us, as you know, the African sun, and you're prepared to sit and wipe up the we don't have any sunscreen, y'all, and we just sit. And I tell you, all I said to the women is, we just want to get to know each other and what are the issues on our hearts.
Yeah.
And in that meeting, I was able to understand the composition of each woman there. We talked, nobody looked at their watch. We talked for like 2 hours. Women talked. I got to know, one, that the academic and practical qualifications of these women, I'd never known. I mean, in regular meetings, it's usually the men that are talking, and there's nothing wrong with that. But to hear how qualified they were, there was barely anyone there who didn't have a degree. We didn't know that. I didn't know that. And in that conversation, I had a better sense of the socioeconomic environment they operate in. I got to know the sense of gender issues, domestic violence, income generation in their homes. This is me putting themes on it. And I've always said, even before I share this, I've got to ask them, is this what you meant?
Yeah.
And there's having their sense of the law, the legal framework that supports women's rights. And I could hear women from 3 different countries share experiences, and and some of them giving advice to the other on what legal frameworks they should tap into. And this person said, I will send you this from our country. This is what the inheritance law says here. This is what, not only was it beautiful, but it was humbling, because no evaluation setting is going to bring that out. And so talk about safe spaces is choosing to sit the way they sit and be the way they are and just be.
Yep. Oh, I just don't want to add anything. This is a perfect way of ending this, and it brings us back to naming the change. What are you trying to do? Are you, what is it that you're, without the structures, without the big, your log frames and apparatus, project apparatus, what are you trying to bring about, and how do you want to engage people and harness as much as you can from all their, you said fragmented, right? All their facets, and use that. Wow, this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Ruby, for sharing your insights, speaking truth to power. And you see what we've done with just 4 words. It's taken us over.
We probably went out of script a little bit, but yeah.
The whole point is the conversation, right? It's not so much the structure. This is just to get you started. But thank you so much for your time, Ruby, and good luck with your work.
Thank you.
And keep sitting on that, under trees, on the grass lawns, sweating away.
That's fine.
To just be more authentic, and as you said, it starts with the self. So if every one of us is more authentic, is really grounded in who they are, then they can share from that place, and it does change things in the long run. Thank you for your time. Talk soon.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Rethink's Social Change Podcast. I hope you got a lot of value and actionable insights from today's show. Would love if you take a minute to leave us a review. And if you work on social change and are up for the challenge, reach out. And before you go, be sure to subscribe so you're the first to know when we release a new episode. Till then, be the change.